Hi, my name's Sarah Byrne, and in this video we'll be looking at how we can use loops in DAFNI workflows. Workflow loops are a powerful tool that enable us to run workflows multiple times on DAFNI with a variety of parameters, all with the push of a button. In this video, we'll show you how to set up and run looping workflows. A looped workflow is built in a similar manner to a standard workflow using the graphical workflow interface. In order to introduce looping to a workflow, we simply add a loop element. This element essentially acts as a container which holds a different workflow which will run multiple times within the loop. We can set this up by selecting one of the loop steps and then choosing the workflow that will be looped over. It's recommended that in advance of looping, the workflow that you'll be looping over has any publication stages removed. We do this to avoid unnecessary duplication of output data, and I'll now quickly demonstrate the best way to do this. Firstly, we'll navigate to the Workflows catalogue and select the workflow that we wish to loop over. In this case, we're selecting the solar irradiance workflow. We can then click on the Duplicate Workflow button, ensuring that we select the Keep Parameter Sets checkbox and then click Confirm. This has created a new workflow, a copy of the previous workflow that's now safe to edit. Inside of Edit Workflow, we can left-click any Publish or Publish and Visualization steps and delete them by pressing the Delete key. This just leaves us to update the workflow metadata, changing the name to ensure it's obvious it's a copy of the previous workflow but with the publication steps removed. This workflow is now ready to be used in our looping workflow. With the workflow we want to loop over now ready for use, we can go back to creating a workflow and set up our loop to use the NoPub workflow that we've just prepared. After setting up that loop element and entering the metadata for any publication elements, which I've already pre-filled, we can proceed to enter the necessary details on the workflow metadata page. Again, this has already been pre-filled and we can move on to the next stage, a very important one as it's the stage where we enter the loop data itself. We can see here that when we select a loop step, if we scroll down, we can iterate over different values of input parameters or different data input files called data slots in this interface. First, we'll add a base parameter set, which sets up the model parameters for this loop. Then we can click on Add a parameter to iterate over a particular parameter for this base set. This will override its initial settings and replace it with a set of looped values. This has opened up a menu box that will allow us to enter details for the loop. First, we'll add the parameter name, being careful to match it exactly as this is case sensitive. After doing that, we can then select the relevant model step for the workflow that corresponds to this parameter. Next, you can choose to either generate a set of values or manually input a set of values that you want to loop over. When manually entering values, after typing them in, make sure you press Enter. Here, we're going to loop over 4 values of the parameter asim, which is the 4 directions on a compass. After we've finished defining the loop, we can click back here onto the workflow canvas to save the data we've just entered and then click the Continue button. Finally, we fill in a metadata for the new looping parameter set that we're creating, making it identifiable in the future. In our case, we're looping over a set of compass directions and we clearly indicate this in the text. After completing this section, we can click Upload Workflow and Parameter Set to finalise everything. At this point, our looped workflow is ready to use. We can run this workflow exactly as we would run a standard workflow. When we do this, it will run the workflow embedded in the loop multiple times. And as we had a loop of 4 parameters, it will run 4 times in our case. If we now click on the play button, on our loop parameter set, we'll set off our looped run. As with non-looped runs, we can see an entry has appeared under instances on the workflows page. Now that the looped run has completed, the status is showing as succeeded. If we now click on the blue text next to our instance, it will take us to the workflow instance status screen, where we can look at the job status and results. If we click on the loop element, we can see the individual iterations of the loop which have run. As expected, there are 4 iterations, 1 for each azimuth setting. We can now left-click on the Publish and Visualize step, which will give us access to the outputs and visualizations. These can be accessed via these 2 dark blue buttons, either Go to Visualization or Go to Dataset. If we now click on the Go to Dataset button, it will allow us to see the output files. This takes us to the Dataset Details page for the outputted dataset, and as you can see, there are 4 output JSON files, 1 for each iteration of our loop. At this point, it's worth noting that in a parallel loop, if you have more than one parameter that you're looping over, you need to keep certain things in mind. Say we want to loop over both the azimuth and tilt parameters in the case we've just shown. We can quickly edit the previous example to demonstrate this. Again, we can select on the loop step and go down to parameters to iterate. We can then add a second parameter. In this case, we're adding tilt, another parameter used in the solar irradiance model. And this time, we'll simply generate 4 values in a uniform distribution between 10 and 20 degrees. We can then quickly change the parameter set metadata to indicate the changes that we've made to the parameter set. When we now run this, you should note that we'll run all possible permutations of the tilt and azimuth parameters. Therefore, this run will have a total of 16 iterations rather than the previous 4. This can be seen on the workflow instance page. If we select the loop step and scroll down, you can see we have 16 iterations. One thing to note, which may not be obvious, is that when you run a series loop element, rather than a parallel loop element, which is what we've been using up until this point, the behaviour will change. With a series loop, the parameters will be paired up to once again give 4 iterations. The other major difference is that in a parallel loop, all of these iterations are being run simultaneously, while in a series loop, they'll be one after the other. And while we've covered parameters in this tutorial, it should be noted that it's also possible to loop over different datasets. You can set these up using the data slots to iterate setting, which is just below the parameters to iterate box. We hope this video has been informative and will help you utilise loops effectively on DAFNI. In addition, there is also a section in the documentation covering loops which you may find helpful. Thank you for watching.